right. Hello, everyone. Well, it's a full house, so hope everyone understands me fine. All right. So, welcome to Fun with Flags. Uh, so yeah, uh, what I would like to present to you is actually, first of all, my brand new app that I created. So I would invite you to start off with to just all grab your phones or whatever and to scan the QR code because I will be doing a live demo with everyone involved. Nothing will go wrong. In the meantime, I'll open the app up myself as well after I give you some time. So what you will find on that link is my brand new flag designer app. Should be working perfectly, right? I'm assuming. Yes, everything right. Under construction. That doesn't sound right. Let's quickly have a look myself. If I move to the app, oh yeah, that's under construction. Yeah, that's not right. Well, let's just fix it immediately. I'll just move to my brand new tool, say, hey, this is all fine. And let's refresh. Oh, it works. All good. So go ahead. You can create your own flags. You can say, create like a lot of things on there. Let's make some colors and stuff and things. It all does stuff, you know. Have a nice symbol there. Why not? I have my flag here. I can even save it if I want to. There we go. Let's give it most beautiful flag ever. Ooh. There we go. Saved. You can see there's already some other flags there as well. Let's have a look at what everyone's creating. A bunch of things. Lovely. So, lovely app. Lots of options, lots of functionality. But what you saw actually just now was it was under construction. How did that happen? Did I make a mistake? Well, of course not. First of all, I am Creuwels. I work at Repos, a company from Belgium. I'm Spring certified, AWS architect. Have some other certificates as well, which I won't bore you with. But yeah, and I've been a developer for about 6 years now. And most recently, I came across a very specific issue at my project, where we had to basically say, okay, we have a new feature, we're ready for it, but unfortunately, we have a dependency that is not ready, an API we had to talk to. That API was not released yet, so then we had to make a decision. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Now, there was an older API which did the same thing as a new one should do. And so what I then eventually came to was, okay, let's just start making a feature flag. So maybe just quick raise of hands. Who has ever heard of feature flags before? Okay, that's pretty much the whole room. I'm hoping you learned something new then. But yeah, feature flags. I'll be following a simple structure here. So we're all web developers, which means I will be following www, the why, the what, and the how. Don't worry, the how will become a wow later. So, but yeah, first of all, what are feature flags and why do we use them? So yeah, of course, why we use them and what they are is very much connected. So I will start with this as one. So why use feature flags? Well, yeah, so for us, the simple use case was, well, okay, we have an API that is not ready, which we need to talk to, so let's just go to the old one and talk to that instead. Which means that for us, it means, okay, we actually have a toggle or a flag that tells us, hey, let's go for one of the other things. Which means what we essentially did was we hide the feature of talking to the new API. And that's the basis of a feature flag, is you're going to hide something, right? So yeah, in our case, it was, okay, well, we have a new release that is to be done, but we don't know when, but we have to be ready. So for us, it meant, well, okay, we're going to put that code on our production environment anyways, and just wait for that newer API, that new spanking brand new API to be ready, and then we can just say, hey, click a button, and we're ready to go in business. Another thing, of course, for features is, well, we can actually hide what is unfinished still, right? So any unfinished features in your code, or even like that haven't been perhaps untested and still were merged to your main branch and gotten onto your production environment can still be hidden this way. So let's see. Now, what are feature flags? Well, that's actually a very simple question with a very simple answer. They're booleans, right? It's a true or false. You're saying yes, you can do something, or no, you cannot do something. Now, of course, in practice, there's a lot more things that come to it, and feature flags have evolved over the years to be more than just this boolean, but I'll come to that later. For now, I should make the distinction, because right now you might see, okay, it's just a boolean, right? But then what's the difference with, say, you have a configuration property? You probably all know Spring, the Spring Framework, Spring Boot, configuration, and all of that. So yeah, you can actually just say, oh, hey, I just have a property in my configuration that says, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do this. Well, big difference would then be, well, actually, a feature flag is usually a separately managed system where you can say, hey, do this live. While your application is running, you can change these types of values. There's lots of methods for this, which I will come to in our how section. But generally speaking, that is what it is. So let's have a look. In our case, well, as you already saw just at the start with the Flag Designer app, what I actively did was simply say, hey, you can have access now or you cannot. Just switch the toggle and we could have, and you all saw the app appear right before your eyes. So then, how to implement feature flags? For that, that's actually a less easy to answer question. So what we have there is, well, first of all, and I have to unfortunately admit, the DIY solution that we use as well. Which means, well, okay, you're still going to have a configuration property somewhere, and you might have to just say, okay, we're going to redeploy our existing application again with the new configuration. Now, in cases where you're saying, okay, I have a very scalable environment, and we scale up and down all the time, that might actually be still a very feasible solution, because probably your configuration will already be externalized or imported through configuration or some properties in the environment, and it might be that indeed all you need to say, hey, we're going to update this flag is we just trigger a restart of our containers or pods or whatever you have in your environment, and as such, your feature is now enabled or disabled, depending on. Then there's like the tools and the libraries. So I've split them up a little bit already. So tools like Unleashed, or Unleash, Flips, Posthog, and on the other hand, you have Toggles and FF4J. So yeah, tools, I've divided them this way because of the way that you use them. The libraries specifically are a bit more, well, a bit less involved in how to set them up. Usually they're just a dependency you pull into your project. You perform some configuration, preferably there's even a Spring Boot starter. And yeah, you just pull it in, it runs the feature flags, it usually provides an UI of some kind if you're running in a web application, or some other way to just update the flags, your configuration effectively, live. And yeah, so in that sense, but they're basically embedded in your application at that point. They're running with it, and while on the other end, where speaking of tools, those are a bit more involved, meaning, well, usually they're separately hosted from your applications. They can be cloud-based, they can just be some Docker container that you're running yourself. There's a lot of options there, and they differ between all of these tools. Also, let me reiterate, or emphasize rather, these tools are definitely not all that there is out there. There is a lot of tools, and I frankly just didn't have space to put them all. So, now one small exception that you see there is Open Feature right in the middle. That's actually a special case because it's a bit like in between both. Open Feature is a standard that has been fairly recently, as in I believe it was March, that they had like a couple new releases and like a version 1, so on, that came out. And they're basically a standard for all of, well, mostly on the left-hand side then, all of those tools to start to follow. It's basically an API, a way to communicate with them, so that basically when you say, hey, I want to use feature flags, you can run any of the tools, somewhere, anywhere you want, and then just say, hey, but the SDK I'm using in my applications is actually independent of those tools. But then, So onto live demo. Where is my right? So yeah, 2 categories. So we have the hosted, which is the tools, and then we have the integrated, which run with your application, of course. But yeah, I will quickly move through this slide and say for a demo. Let's see. Let's boot this up because it crashed again. All right. So what I have here is actually just the actual backend for the app you've all been able to access just now. So what I have in here, well, to put it simply, and I hope this is readable for all the way in the back, but if it's not, let me know. I can make it a bit larger. But so yeah, basics I have here is, so maybe first of all to say, I will be doing 2 demos of, well, implementations of this, one with Unleash and one with toggles. Toggles will come in a moment, and I'll discuss the differences then afterwards. So for Unleash, well, okay, first of all, Unleash, it is a separately hosted, so it's a Docker container you can run anywhere, or they provide their own cloud service as well. Docker container is free, their cloud free service is not, just so you know. But yeah, how to use it? Well, they have their own SDK and actually a starter, which you see right here. So simple thing, we know Spring Boot, pull the starter in, perform some configuration, which is right over here. And then, yeah, so again, these tokens are just localhost, so sorry, can't do much with them. But yeah, so some basic configuration. Where is our Unleash instance located? What environment is it for? So again, this is something you can configure, whether it's for your development environment or production environment, and so on. So some basic configurations. And then in our actual code, well, we can do things like, let's have a look, this. So 2 methods of actually like starting to create your toggles and having them affect your code for Unleash. One is this annotation, toggle, which you can then put on a service. So this is specifically for their starter, so Spring Boot starter and Spring Boot integration. So you use this toggle, you say, hey, I want to use this flag, which I've defined in our class, to say, okay, if this is true, then, hey, go to this new service, my new flag service. Difference being, well, okay, you have the default, the no op, which basically just does nothing. Nothing works. And then we have the flag service, which has a lot of code, right? Specifically named this way, just so Unleash knows where to look. And so it will automatically switch between these. So if I, for example, say, hey, where am I calling this method? That's in my controller. And I can see, well, okay, not much done here. I'm saying, hey, save this flag. It will just say, all right, on this specific thing, which is just the interface that I've auto-wired, call this method. And depending on whether my flag is on or off, it will switch between the 2 implementations. Now, the other method then, which I've implemented in my validator class, is the actual client, right? So they have their own wrapper. So underneath, this is of course also called by the annotation, or by the generated proxy for the annotation. But yeah, this will be called as well. And then I can just say, hey, tell me whether some feature is enabled. Pretty much same case. But with this, yeah, you can then just start creating your own if, else statements, and so on and so on. So, onto, let's quickly say, Unleash itself then. Because apart from this, we actually have the hosted application of Unleash, right? So in here, all is fairly straightforward, right? You have your simple UI after setup. So of course you need to authenticate before you can actually get in here. But yeah, after that, it's a simple case of, okay, I have a new feature that I want to support. Let's create a feature toggle, and let's call it, let's see, the Spring IO toggle. So this is for releases. So these kinds of types can just, these are purely semantic and for some flavor, but they don't actually perform any difference or anything different. So I'll just leave it at release for now. Default project. Yeah, no description. And let's say that we create this. And what we get is a default configuration for toggle, where we can then say, okay, well, I only have one environment at the moment, development. which I can say, hey, turn this on or off. And that's basically it. Now you see some special things here, which I will come to, such as strategies, but that will be discussed in a moment. First of all, let's then have a look at the other side. So this is the tool side, hosted. So this is a Docker container that I'm running or can run locally. The other option being that we look at an actual backend. So this is, let's say, you're just creating an API, nothing else, and you only need the API. Okay, in that case, does it still make sense to say, okay, I'm actually going to start and creating a hosted application, hosting a separate Docker container, and so on and so on? Well then, if that's your use case and you're saying, okay, all I actually need is just a simple integration, then Toggles is an option. So what Toggles looks like is, again, we have a starter, a bit more involved in here just because they have actually some extra stuff involving, well, using actuator to configure it and to switch toggles on or off. Also integration with Spring Boot, which is separated. And then finally, yeah, their own console, which I'm pulling in so that I can actually have a UI for the configuration. But yeah, the basis is just the starter here. And so the way this works is, and let's quickly go, slightly different. So same implementation apart from that. So, but instead of, let's say, we're throwing exceptions in a separate implementation, Toggles actually has an annotation that works directly on controllers. So, and what this does is, well, you have the features are active annotation, where you can then say, hey, if a feature is active, in this case, like flag, but multiple options actually there, so you could just make it an array. I will be throwing this, or returning rather, this not implemented HTTP status. So, yeah, fairly basic. And of course, there's also the alternative of saying, hey, but instead of that, I will actually want to use a client. Well, same thing there. You can auto-wire a feature manager, which apparently I'm not using. Let's do that. There we go. Just auto-wire it, and then same thing as with Unleash. You can just check whether a feature is active or not. Then, to actually run this, let's quickly start this up. And move to the view. So, configuration, a little bit different. Well, of course, it's a different tool. So it would look something like this. It's a little bit less nicer, but frankly, this is an open source project. Like one guy made it, you know, in some basement somewhere, I'm assuming. But yeah, so simple thing, and where again you have the same options of saying, hey, let's enable something or disable something. Let's just put some stuff on. So yeah, Toggles, fairly simple library to use, and again, most of these are. They usually have starters, or at least these ones have. And usually have like actual integrations with Spring. But yeah. All right. To quickly return to the slides then. So, now, as for the differences, I already discussed some of them. I'll just reiterate them to make it clear for everyone. So Unleash, yeah, I'm running a container, Docker, right? Also the online version you're seeing is just a Docker container that's running, while Toggles, in this case, was integrated in my own application. If we're speaking of the actual SDKs, well, Toggles is also Java only, unfortunately. While Unleash, well, because they're actually just a separate service and an API you can call, well, if you really want to, you don't need any SDKs, but they have been so nice as to provide some for us. So yeah, Java is supported, Python, Go, .NET, lots of JavaScript frameworks as well. And Unleash actually has an offering of both their own SDKs that are provided as a lot of community provided ones. So for example, Angular for Unleash is community provided, while React, for example, they have in-house. Don't know why, but yeah. Then as for environments, well, yeah. So as you saw already, I was speaking of the development environments. So usually you could, oh, that wasn't, so is he happy yet? So usually when we're speaking of an environment, yeah, you might say we have acceptance, we have production, we have our test environment, and so on. So yeah, which is why here I said 2 or unlimited. So the free version is unfortunately, of Unleash is unfortunately only provides 2 specific environments. But frankly, you can still work around with it by just saying, hey, let's run a separate Unleash server for production or something, which might even be safer because, well, let's say more security that way and not giving everyone access to every configuration for every environment. Right, and then for toggles, well, it's actually unsupported because what does it matter if you're just running toggles directly inside of your own application? And there's no use for saying, hey, there's multiple environments because it's still configurable as is in that moment. As for pricing, well, so Unleash free and paid version. So the free version, couple less features, while toggles, is fully free and just ready to integrate. So on to then something that, I believe there was a talk yesterday already about Spring Boot Admin, which has actually similar features like for reloading your application or reloading your configuration. And that's actually, it's for a similar purpose, of course. Like, hey, let's say we want to change something. You could say, hey, I'm going to manage my feature flags with this. Some of the basics of it. So you could use Spring Cloud Config as well. Spring Boot Admin is an option. I won't go into much detail for that. I'll just refer back to the talk of yesterday since they touched on it a lot. Spring Cloud Config has the same type of system where you could annotate beans with the refresh scope annotation. And as such, then trigger an endpoint on actuator, if enabled, of course, to just have it refresh your configuration. And following that, refresh all of the beans that might have been affected by that configuration. So also an option if you're saying, hey, I don't want to go crazy with all kinds of new libraries that aren't Spring official. But just to quickly touch onto that. And then what we have is, well, there's actually an evolution that's happened in flags, of course. So a feature flag, well, for starters, it was just a Boolean, as I mentioned before. But now it's actually become a lot more. While a feature flag might have initially started saying yes or no, now you could say, hey, there's actually some differences there. So I already showed you the flag types. We had experimental, release, operational, which was an option. And those are just, for flavor and just to signify, hey, what is this? But they still matter. And it's a case of, okay, they've been starting to be used for multiple different purposes. You might say, hey, we want to disable certain features because of, let's say, after 10 p.m., we don't want to run this expensive job anymore, so let's just disable this. Make sure that it doesn't start anymore. Or let's say, hey, I know that my employees shouldn't be working after 10 p.m., so let's just turn it off, turn the application off. Those are kinds of things that they might be used for. All right, but for the rest, gradual rollout, segments, and auth integration, I will actually move quickly back to toggles itself, or not toggles, but our Unleash, and just demonstrate here. So the things you saw just now, segments, authorization integration, and so on. So those things mean, okay, let's say, hey, let's actually start to enable feature flags maybe only for certain users. Gradual rollout means then, hey, let's actually only enable feature flags for a certain percentage of our users. These are the kinds of things that you might want to do there. And I would like to see, for those who have actually used the app and added some things, whom of you actually saw, I believe it was this one, if I quickly check. No, that's not the one. See, because I just want to know whom of you was the unlucky person that didn't get the proper color picker. Because only 98% of users was allowed to use the integrated, HTML color picker of your browser. The other ones, sorry, you're limited to text only. Anyone who noticed it? I don't know. Anyone? No hands? Oh, that one person there who was unfortunate enough? Okay, well, sorry, but just to demonstrate, this is very easily changed, of course. Let's just put it to 100, and then with a simple refresh, you should be. So it was also fully random, so even across refreshes, you might have had the issue of, okay, suddenly I don't see that anymore. But let's put it on up to 100, and then no one has the issue anymore. Right. Something you saw here as well is stickiness. That's just the method of which Unleash uses to determine, okay, by which metric will I say, hey, who was this user, or which session is this, for which I have to assign a specific value. And that should keep throughout the lifetime. So yeah, in this case, session ID is an option, user ID is an option. The default is also just session-based. And then random, of course, which is just, hey, you refresh and it might be something different. But then, yeah, to move on to something else, let's quickly see. Something else that you might have seen is, well, actually, if I modify this, I believe, oh, it wasn't here. I can make it so I just put this in 100. I can make it, for example, that only one user, and you have the drop down for users on the app as well, one user is allowed to use the charges, which means if I want to make a new flag, and I'm currently, I'll just say, hey, I'm anonymous. Oh, and let's put it there. That means, oh, actually my option just disappears. No more charges for me. So, and that's just fully managed in that tool. Well, as soon as I say, hey, I'm Sheldon, I should be able to do these things. There we go. All an option again. So, yeah, so these types of integration, of course, they take some time and some work. So for Unleash, there's unfortunately not a direct integration. It takes some work, which I'll quickly show you. Oh, I closed that one. Which is done through, well, some still fairly basic configuration. Let's see, it's not there. It is in here, the Unleash configuration. So in this case, I'm just saying, hey, this is what's, well, helping me to tell Unleash, hey, this is your context. Now, context is important for feature flags because it tells a lot of things to whatever tool you have. And context is what is basically saying, hey, this is who I am, and this is what kinds of roles and things that I might be able to have. And you can be very custom with this. So in my case, I actually said, hey, any user that's authenticated all gets a beta role. And this you can then, again, this gets forwarded to the Unleash API, and they can then be interpreted to give you back the actual status, right? But in this case, yeah. So I'm just making sure that it knows, hey, who is the user by this specific property, so that it knows how to make the difference, right? So moving back then to the slides. Here we go. So what we then have is actually a small update to why use feature flags. Because now we can actually do a lot more. With these features, we can say, hey, we have a group of users that is our beta users, as I just shown you. And we can start saying, okay, well, these users should have access to maybe not fully tested or finished features yet. And say, hey, we're just going to do live testing in production. Why not? With feature flags, it's all an option. You could say, hey, let's just make a poll. Let's see, okay, some users just have them right into you and say, hey, do you want to help us test our application? You get access to some funky unreleased features, but there might be some bugs, and they know. So yeah. But yeah, so A/B testing also possible, saying, hey, I have 2 implementations of some new feature. Let's say we don't know which is most efficient yet. Let's just put them both in production and just have a toggle. Let's say half of our user base gets the one, half gets the other. Have live testing. And once you know, hey, okay, this or the other is best, then let's say, hey, we just move the slider to one or the other end and just say, there you go. We now know which is the best, and as such, that's the one we're going to give to our users. All right. Now, one thing I should mention is, and I don't believe I put it on slide, is when not to use feature flags, or rather when to stop using feature flags. Because as you can imagine, and I actually already have the issue myself, right here, these are already quite a couple of flags, right? This is now a couple of 10. So this is about 10 flags. So then the question becomes, okay, well, when to stop using them? So you could just say, hey, well, let's just turn these on or off, and just have them then there permanently on the slider. But generally speaking, at some point you want to remove your feature flags. You want to remove the option of going back to one or the other implementation. Simply because, well, eventually you won't need it anymore. You have tested your feature, you know it's stable, you know there is no reason for it anymore. As for that, I do really have to emphasize, know when to remove them. Know that, okay, we're done with this testing, we're done with this, and we can just say we're moving our codes to the right versions, we're just removing the toggle for it, and it will just be a permanent thing now, permanent fixture of your code base in production or wherever. Right? Very important one to emphasize. All right. There we go. So, with that, we went from our how to our wow. We have our 3 W's. And so, I'm open for questions. Thank you for all for listening. And if there's anything more to know, let me know.